Hello, everybody. Welcome to Happy Writer Days workshops. Today, we're going to talk about overcoming imposter syndrome for writers, how you can get over all that self-doubt or feeling like you're a fraud or you're never going to be good enough to write your friggin' book already. And I'm really excited to be bringing in author and writing coach, Leigh Stein. Did I say that right? Leigh? It rhymes with B. I love that your Twitter name tells me how to say your name.
Yeah.
That makes me excited. So rhymes with B. Leigh was here to chat with us about imposter syndrome. So welcome. I want to remind everybody, if you're watching live, that there's a chat box that way. It might be that way, but I think it's that way, where you can ask us questions. And we also have a worksheet for you to download down below us. You can enter your email and we'll send you a worksheet. So I'm really excited about being able to give you this wonderful workshop. And it's part of Happy Writer Days, which is a program that a group of authors and I got together to try to encourage you to write this winter. Winter is such a great time to sit and like cuddle up with a book, and we think you should cuddle up with your own book. So we want you to write this winter. And you can enter to win over $2,000 in coaching and courses at happywriterdays.com. That ends December 10th. So if you're watching this after December 10th, you can still go there, and we're going to have a lot of free resources for you to help you write no matter what time of year it is. So welcome, Leigh. Hi, can you tell us a little bit about who you are and why you're here?
Sure. Hi, Lauren. Hi, everybody. My name is Leigh. It is spelled a funny way, so I answer to other things, but it is pronounced Leigh. And I've written 3 books. I have a novel and a book of poetry from an indie press called Melville House. And my most recent book is a memoir called Land of Enchantment that came out from Plume in the summer of 2016. And I teach a lot of memoir workshops in New York City and on the internet. And I'm also a writing coach. So I help writers who have some kind of book or some kind of book proposal or some kind of project that they want to finish, and for some reason they've been stuck. So I'm really interested in the psychology behind why we get stuck on our projects, even though it's our dream and our passion to finish it. And so that's why I'm excited to do this workshop with Lauren, because I know so many people are writers or want to be writers, and yet they haven't taken that first step, or they haven't taken that second step.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I get stuck. I have so many books that I'm just stuck on, that I've written a first draft or I've written a 5th draft and I'm just stuck on. So I love that we're going to talk about what are the emotional blocks, what are the ways in which you get stuck. So my first big question for you is, what the heck is imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome is a phrase that was coined by these 2 women in the 1970s. Their names were Suzanne Imes and Pauline Rose Clance. And they noticed this phenomenon where women who were very successful and had accomplished a lot felt like frauds, felt like, well, I didn't really deserve that. I must have just been lucky. Or, well, she really deserved it, and there must have been a mistake that I got it. And so they were really curious in studying this phenomenon. And what I've found in my experience is that it's not so much a phenomenon that happens to beginners. It happens when you reach a certain level and you're aware of the experience and the accomplishments of those around you, and then you become even harder on yourself. Your inner critic becomes even meaner because you see where you could go. And just to give a brief example, I experience this all the time, but in the summer of 2015, this woman reached out to me, and she had read my poetry, and she asked if she could pay me $2,000 to write an essay about her artwork. And the fact that she offered me so much money, this seemed like an incredible amount of money for an essay. The fact that she offered me so much money, even though I'd already written 2 books, I'd written essays, I'd been published many places, it filled me with this idea of like, well, what makes me qualified? And what if I give her an essay and it's so stupid and she laughs at me and I don't know anything about art? And what if all this? Even though she came to me because I had accomplished something that she read, and I procrastinated on it for months. I drafted an email where I said I couldn't do it, but I didn't send the email. I went to bed. And I ended up writing it, and I finished it. But
and what was the result? Did she like it?
Yeah, she said, oh my God, like I knew it would be good, but I had no idea you knew so much about art. Like I had done all this research, and yeah, it was great. And now we're friends, and it was all fine. But it was just my own mental sabotage, my fear of failing.
So could imposter syndrome be kind of rounded out as like your own? Is it just your own sabotage? Is all sabotage imposter syndrome?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it's also that we come to rely on external validation. If we come to rely on external validation too much, we lose our own sense of whether it's good or bad. So like, you know, I needed her to tell me that, but she wasn't going to tell me that until I wrote it. I had to write it. I had to write it first to get the validation that I needed. So I think the sabotage comes in before you've even produced anything.
Yeah. I also think of imposter syndrome as the same way that shame happens. So shame is like an absorption of what other people tell you you shouldn't be, or that you aren't, or that you should be. And so I think of imposter syndrome as a way for us. I like to, when I think about imposter syndrome, I like to think of it as a part of a community, a value issue too. Like, so my history, as many people know, is in talking about sex and talking about body image. And so when people have all this shame over being queer, like I had when I was a kid, or people have all this shame over being fat, like I had for most of my life and still struggle with, I think about how that imposter syndrome, like I couldn't be a movie star because movie stars don't look like me. Mm-hmm. And so when I start on the path to be a movie star, I feel like someday someone's going to like point out that I'm a fraud simply because I'm fat and queer and awkward and maybe not as funny as like I'd like to be. So, or like I'm not a certain type. So I think about the ways in which when I work with imposter syndrome, and I like Leigh work with a lot of coaching on this as well. So many of my clients are like, well, it's not good enough. I'm like, well, it doesn't have to be good enough. How many crappy books are out there? Like you have permission to not be that great because you know who's mediocre all the time and gets a ton of credit? Straight white men. Like, I tell people, like, what would a straight white man do? A straight white man would still give it a try, even if he had not the proper training, if he didn't have the like validation. And I'm not saying that's not true. I know plenty of like straight white men that have other issues happening as well. But we praise certain people for their mediocrity and put other people down for their greatness. And I want to give people permission. I think one of the biggest steps I like to talk about when we're talking about imposter syndrome is recognizing the way in which marginalized communities are expected to be 10 times better at things to get half the credit. And I want you to give yourself 10 times the credit and maybe just try like half and just kind of start there. So when we think about imposter syndrome, think about the ways in which different people with different privileges absorb societal norms to make them feel inadequate. And that's where a lot of this like imposter syndrome comes up. What are your thoughts on that?
I love everything you just said. And I love that you use the word permission. And I see this so often that people, and I'm going to generalize and say, especially women, I work a lot with women and I ran a conference for women writers. They're waiting for someone else to give them the permission to write this story that's burning inside them. And the fact of the matter is, like, you're going to have to give yourself that permission to write that because no one else is going to. And the other thing is this idea of qualifications. Well, you talk about it in terms of identity, which is so resonant and so real. And for myself, I relate to it in terms of qualifications. I dropped out of high school. I don't have an MFA. I didn't finish college until I was 28. I worked my way through school. And so the fact that I don't have like a degree from Yale or an MFA puts me in a certain category of writers. And so I look at other writers and I'm like, oh, well, they have this that I don't have. So it must mean that blah, blah, blah. But who's doing the work? You can give yourself permission to do the work. And like anything, you can become better at writing by practicing.
Yeah, I think that's a really great transition into what we were kind of brainstorming over what's the number one way to get over imposter syndrome. And I hate to have to tell people this because it's the thing that nobody wants to hear, but you got to just like do it. You just got to do the work. I wish that my book, Body Love, 10 Steps to Profoundly Loving Your Body, when I wrote it, I wanted to just like have him wave a magic wand and make everybody feel good about themselves. But the only way that you like get over these kind of mental breaks, especially when they're so societal and we've been told for so long that there will be consequences if we step out of our comfort zone or out of the boxes that people have put us in, is to just do it, is to like take one little step at a time. And I think that's maybe a good time to bring in the word that we kept coming back to all the time. And both Leigh and I were like, audacity.
Yeah,
Audacity.
I have this on my laptop when I write to remind myself.
There's an audacity to having to find your voice. There's an audacity to having the, like, how dare you tell your story? How dare you think that someone want to read something that you came up with? And that's like the imposter syndrome. And you have to have the audacity to be like, no, I dare. Like, I dare. I am audacious enough to dare. So how does audacity resonate with you, Leigh?
It makes me feel excited. It makes me like the idea of rebellion. I have this joke among my friends because my boyfriend's very like, how do I describe it? He's very like serious and conservative and more, he doesn't take big risks, where I'm the one that's like the artist. It's always, so like every time I have a big idea, I tell him my big idea and he says something like, I don't know. Like I told him I was going to start this conference for women writers and he was like, that sounds like a lot of work. And I realized over time that I need him to say that so that I can rebel against it. I need someone to say, I don't know if that's such a good idea, because that's what inspires me to do it. So for me, audacity means, oh, this isn't the best choice, or what will someone say if I write this thing about X? Then I know I have to do it.
I love that. For me, that's very, very similar. I actually need the first person I tell to be like, hell yeah, that sounds awesome. And then like the third person I tell to be like, maybe you should probably like learn some of the language before you travel in the middle of Ukraine by yourself. Like maybe you should just like know the food or the culture just a little bit, like, and luckily that person was right. And I learned a little bit of it and it was helpful. So that kind of like little bit of voice of reason. One of my best friends, she's my voice of reason. And I need that in your life. But then you also have the audacity to do it anyways, even if it goes beyond reason.
Yeah. And what you just said reminded me of this. I took an op-ed project seminar. I really recommend them if you're interested in learning how to write op-eds. And they have us play this game called Best Friend, Worst Enemy. So you say your idea and your best friend, who's like another person in the class, says, it's basically yes and, if you know improv, like yes and, like, oh yes, and you could do this, and you could talk to this person, and this. And then your worst enemy says, but what about, don't you think you should, but what about those people who, and I think you have to have both, right? You have to have those cheerleaders on your team that are like, hell yeah, you're going to write a book. And those people that are like, okay, don't forget about, have you thought about, how are you going to make time for, you need both.
Yeah. In the beginning stage though, I highly suggest the yes and people though, getting the yes and, because one of the things that we talked about is not just audacity, but like you've got to actually do it. And if you're going to actually do it, if you're going to actually sit down and write, which is one of the best ways of overcoming imposter syndrome, is actually doing the work, then you're going to have somebody who's like, yeah, write that book, sit down, do it. It's going to be super great. Do it. And sometimes that person has to just be you. Sometimes there's not going to be somebody in your life that has that. But if you don't have that somewhere, that desire to do it, then you're never going to do it. And you shouldn't. If like you don't want to do it, you shouldn't do it. But you got to find a way to like psych yourself up, especially in the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I can't give someone, like I can help someone finish what they want to finish, but I can't give them the desire to do it. Like the desire has to come from inside you.
I think that we should talk a little bit about, we kind of skipped over it a little bit, but I wanted to delve deeper into the way that fear plays into imposter syndrome. Mm-hmm. And I once heard Glennon Doyle Melton of the Monastery say that writer's block is simply just fear. And I love this saying, I think it's Anne Lamott, but I'm not 100% sure. My Finding Your Right Space course has a link to this, and you have a link to that course in your worksheet, and it's a free course I offer. But there's someone in that course that I have a quote that they talk about, like, writer's block doesn't exist. It's either procrastination or fear, because think about when you're like in school and you have a paper due, you always can finish it the night before. Like there's a way to get it done when there's a deadline. And so when they talk about when the fear of doing it, the fear of not doing it has to overcome the fear of doing it. So when we talk about fear and writer's block, I sit down to write something that's really hard, and that's exactly when Facebook gets real interesting. That's when, oh my God,
Totally
I have to clean my bedroom. I cannot live or write without all my laundry perfectly folded, which I don't perfectly fold my laundry, but all of a sudden today's the day that I have to perfectly fold my laundry. And I feel like the harder the piece is, the more that it's going to take me to put it out there, the more I come up with reasons to procrastinate. So writer's block, for me at least, feels simply like fear. So when I sit down and I find myself like just easily distracted, or I find myself not wanting to work on a project, I journal through, okay, what am I afraid of? Like, what is the worst scenario that could happen if I write this piece? So what do you feel about writer's block? Does that resonate with you? Writer's block fear? Does that feel similar to you?
Yeah, I love what you say about, I love that you journal through it. That's such a smart idea. It's such a proactive thing you can do in the moment. And I also love this. I love the idea using fear as your compass. If you're afraid of writing something, it means that you probably have to write that thing. Like, especially I find this often comes up for memoirists, where they're like, I know I need to write about X, but I can't. And they put it off and they put it off and they put it off. But there's some heat, there's some kind of hot thing that they don't want to touch. But that's the thing that's at the heart of the memoir. You know, it's easy to write like, well, I grew up in a white house, you know, like it's easy to just kind of go through all the description and the set decoration, but to write those scenes that really changed your life, that can be really hard. But that's what makes a great memoir.
Work through that block, that emotional fear.
Whew. It was really
that's the answer. Woo.
Woo. When I was writing my memoir, like there were some days where all I could do was read my old emails or read my old diaries. Like I couldn't also write that day. I think psychologically and emotionally, sometimes you have to break it down into smaller pieces. Like maybe one day is like you're rereading these diaries that are going to trigger a lot of feelings, and then you're going to sleep on it, and then the next day you're going to start to write. I find that to be really helpful with memoir and essay. I'm writing a novel now, and I'm just having so much fun because it's not so emotionally dark. So that can be another thing. This is actually like a funny procrastination technique, is to have like two different things you're working on so that you end up doing both, but you switch. If you're like, oh, today I am not going to work on that essay, I hate that essay, then you have to work on your novel. So you end up getting things done by toggling.
I think that's great. I actually really resonate with that right now because I am working on a memoiristic novel. It's not actually a memoir, but it's very, 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 very close to it. And I finished the first draft and I couldn't get myself to work back on it again. I just couldn't. It was so deep and so hard. And I had to go away on these writers' retreats to just have a place where I'd like cry half the time. And it's about watching my brother die and the like 2 years after when I was suicidal and all this stuff. I mean, it's a really hard, really deep, really intense, beautiful novel, but hard to work on. So I went to go work on it and I couldn't. So I started writing this like super easy to write, fun book about like a fat girl who a super hot movie star falls in love with her. and like she's like struggling with, am I gay? What would it be like to be a fat person like dating a movie star? What would and it started with like a dream that I had that The Rock wanted to date me. So I took this like really kind of crazy dream and wrote a book, and it's fun. And I'm like you, like I live in the realm of memoir and deep, and it can be really personal. And sometimes the thing that scares me the most and keeps me from writing the most is like, what will people think? This might be my life. Like, no one's going to think that this is my life. Like, I'm obviously not dating The Rock, although
you're not dating The Rock? Are you serious?
Go straight for The Rock. I'm not going to lie. Like, if you're out there, Dwayne Johnson, I can move this ring over here. I'm not married. It's just there for looks. But yeah, so sometimes the answer, I love that you brought that up, because sometimes the answer to writer's block is to write something else that's less pressure. Like the beginning is always fun. And I always find like my house never gets clean when it needs to be cleaned. It gets clean when I have to do something else. So you can psych yourself out when you're starting to feel like, oh, I'm not good enough to finish this. You can be like, oh, I'm good enough to write this like silly little thing over here. And then that silly little thing could actually turn into something good.
Yeah, that's totally true. And while you were talking, I thought of one more technique that I use, which is when you're writing a whole book, I mean, it's very overwhelming because you have so much material compared to an essay or a short story. And so especially with memoir and essay, but you could do this with a novel, is to get really specific and like make an inventory of what you have and what you need to do next. And by making it really specific, it's actionable. So it might be like page 27, look up penguins and write description of penguin or something. It can be so that you have these concrete things, because when you're writing about really intense personal material, it feels like, I mean, I don't know if you relate to this, Lauren, but it, like, you have to go back there in order to write it, and it's exhausting. And so any way you can make it kind of more clinical and detached, revise chapter 3 from the present tense, you know, then you're giving yourself a task, and it will be emotional, it will be hard, but you can check it off your list.
I love that idea of giving yourself a list to check off. So when you feel like you're a fraud, lists can help give you that, like, unfortunately, we give a lot of validation to left brain things. We give a lot of validation to making a to-do list and checking it off. And so when writing a poem today feels like you're a fraud or you're an imposter or a waste of your time, or like, how dare you be a poet? How dare you be someone who just simply like creates art? If you add like create art to your to-do list, or you add a time to write in your schedule, and you did it, that feels like a left brain accomplishment that can help you overcome a lot of that imposter syndrome that comes from simply being an artist or creative or somebody who wants to create in a world where we don't really value creativity and art for the sake of it.
Right. That's so true. Like, well, did you get paid $5 for that poem? What's the value of that poem? I think this is something I'm really interested in. It's like, you know, I started off as a poet, then I wanted to be a real writer. And so that's when I wrote a novel. And to this day, I get more fan emails, responses to my poetry than to anything else, which is so funny to me, because I worked for years to make this career and to write for the New York Times and, get paid for my writing. But really, it's like these poems that I wrote for $0 that I just wanted to share with my best friend in an email that eventually got published somewhere are the ones that people respond to.
Yeah. Sometimes it's the stuff that you're not, and I talk about this a lot. When you are writing to sell, you're not always resonating, and you're not always going to be able to sell it because of that. I mean, there is something to writing for sell and to sell. And part of the Happy Writers Days, we talked about freelance writing, and you can go and look that if you want to write to sell and make money. But I think that even if you want to make money off of it, you have to be there to tell it first and foremost, or they're never going to buy it because it's not going to be as good. And two, sometimes those things where we make no money off of it end up being the way that we get our next client, or the way that we like make our new best friend. I know so many people that a piece that I wrote up on my blog brought them to me, and I didn't make a dime off of that, but they're now people that are really important in my life. So yep. The way in which we create needs to be just like permission. Again, we come back to that, like having the audacity to simply create for you. Like, you are enough. You can be super selfish and in this like world of your own where you're allowed to just like live in your own world and write. Mm-hmm. How do you give yourself permission?
How do I give myself permission? How do I give myself permission? I think I just am very obsessive. And so when I get obsessed with something, I just have to follow it. I have to follow where that obsession goes. And I've always just been really motivated by spite, for better or for worse. So the idea of, I was underestimated by so-and-so, so-and-so doesn't think I could do this, so-and-so thinks I'm this kind of writer, I'll show them. That really drives me to go. And so I don't feel like I need permission. That's just my own inner engine is kind of obsession and proving myself.
Yeah, I can feel that. I feel like I was, like I'm trying to let go of this, but I was an awkward fat kid in high school. So I always dreamt of like our 20-year reunion when I had the New York Times bestseller book. And like, I could be like, well, I didn't get laid in high school, but I've got a New York Times bestseller.
Yeah.
Vote me on prom queen, but like, I've got most likely to succeed now kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to let that go because that doesn't actually serve me currently. It did help me get through high school, and it was a very valid thing for a long time. But I also think that for permission, it sounds really morbid. Every time I bring it up, I'm like, I feel really morbid, but like your mortality is your permission slip. And I watched my brother die of cancer at 25. And like he got the kind of cancer you only get if you're like 80 and chew tobacco your whole life. And he didn't even smoke cigarettes. Like he just got a random kind of cancer and died a year and a half later. And it was horrible. And watching that made me realize, like, one day, and then also at the same time, my grandpa died 2 months later and he was like 92. So I'm like, okay, you could be 25, you could be 92. You don't know. But either way, I don't want to die without having had the audacity to live. I don't want to die without a book. Like, as my brother was dying in front of me, I had this weird out of body experience, and everything was like, write books, write books, write books, write books, write books, like screaming in my head, when you die, you need to have written. So like I had that powerful experience, but everybody has that same permission slip. Like my brother wasn't the permission slip. My own mortality is the permission slip, and every single person has their own permission slip. And so when I start to feel like I don't have permission, I write my eulogy. And I think about what I want people to say at my funeral and what I want to be known for. And you know what's funny is, like, I don't care if I lost weight. I don't care if my dishes were done. I don't care if I looked good. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong.
There's
like
no
I love
obituaries that say, and she was a size 4.
Yeah, right. No one mentions your weight in your obituary, or like how perfect your eyebrow game was.
Yeah.
So I like to think of my mortality as my permission slip. And when my clients are really struggling with feeling like they don't have the right to tell their story, I have them write their eulogy and see what it would feel like to die, even if no one else reads it. What would it feel like to die and not have this done?
Yeah, I love that. It's the idea of legacy. What do you want to leave behind? Do you want to leave behind? She always wanted to write a book, but never found the time, But also I find the idea for me that's really powerful is also this idea of future you. Like, you may not want to do something in the moment, but if you can imagine future you, and it's like, yeah, future you would have wanted me to do whatever it is,
Yeah, I love that. That's a good one. I need to bring that back. I did that like years ago, but I haven't thought about the future you thing. See, Leigh, you're helping me out too.
It's really interesting. I found it in an article years ago, but they were saying research shows that it's nearly impossible for us to imagine us as an older self. This is why young people don't save for retirement, because it's so hard to imagine ourselves as retirement age. It's like we can't even fathom what that would be like. So it's very hard for us to think proactively into the future.
I like 1 year from now me. Like, what would 1 year from now me want me to do right now? Because if I think like, what would 20 years from now me want to do? I'm like,
impossible. Yeah.
Probably eat more ice cream. Let's be real.
Yeah. Yeah. A year from now. That's so great. Yeah.
Yeah. A year from now me would want me to like shut off Facebook and go. So let's talk about, we talked about one of the biggest ways to overcome imposter syndrome is simply to do the work and to sit your butt in the chair and write. And so what are some of the ways that you do that? What are some of the ways that you create space and time in your life for writing?
So I love being on the internet. And so I know that I'm easily distracted by the internet, by whatever news is happening that I must know about in the moment. So I also know that if I don't write in the morning, I'm never going to write that day. If I'm like, oh, no, but I'm just going to look at Twitter and I'll write in the afternoon, it doesn't happen. So the best thing I can do for myself is the night before, I turn off the Wi-Fi on my laptop. I put my phone on airplane mode. I can still use my alarm on my phone if I need to. But then when I wake up in the morning, I have no internet because I've taken it away from myself. And then I write as long as I can. For me, my students are often surprised. I think my students think that I write like 8 hours a day. I write 1 to 2 hours a day. 2 hours would be like an amazing day. But I'm also freelance. I'm doing a bunch of other things. It's not like I'm paid to write this novel that I'm working on. I'm not. I'm doing it because I'm obsessed with it. So that's the best thing I can do is get an hour or two of writing before I look at the internet or check my email.
I think that's great. I actually, I try to do the same thing. I have right here, I had a friend buy me an hourglass because even a timer was too technology. I'd like play with the timer or mess with the timer, and you can't pause an hourglass, a sand glass. I mean, I can like, I've turned it on its side before.
I love it.
But it's like hard to pause it and restart it and all that stuff. And then I had one of my best friends buy it for me because I couldn't, like, this is my permission slip. She wrote inspired productivity on it, on this little thing. And this was like $9 on Amazon, but she bought it for me because when I sit down, I have to remember that like she wants me to write. So on days when I can't write for myself, I write for her because she wants to read this current book that I'm writing or whatever I'm working on. So sometimes you need someone else to give you a permission slip like that. And I'm with you. I think that people have this idea that novelists sit and write for hours on end. And if you get a good solid hour a day, that's a really good,
make a lot of progress on an hour a day.
Yeah. And so I encourage people to try to start with an hour a week and to not think of it as a writing hour, but to think of it as a, creativity hour. I love The Artist's Way. I think a lot of people that take The Artist's Way, which is a very famous book on creativity, they focus on the morning pages, the doing 3 pages of journaling every morning, and they forget to take themselves out on the artist date, which is the other part of it. So I write in my calendar, and I think all of you should write in your calendar right now too, a time, one day a week, and I write the location in there so I know exactly where I'm going. One day a week where I'm taking myself out on an artist date. And sometimes I go to a coffee shop and I write. Sometimes I'm lucky enough that I live with my sister who's an artist. And so I go, if you see behind me, her art studio is right behind me. And so I go into this room and turn on some music and paint, or I go walk through a bookstore. Sometimes when nothing else works, I just walk through a Barnes & Noble or the library. So something to spark your creativity, and that starts to give you permission to be creative. And then that hour period can be eventually that thing that pulls you so much takes up that hour period. So for me now, it's this novel I'm working on. When I have that creativity day, I'm just like really into that novel and go right into it. But some days it doesn't. So some days I paint. But having an hour where you are in your calendar blocked off every week, you know what you're going to do, or you don't, or you have like 3 or 4 options, it really actually makes a difference to put it in your calendar.
I agree. And I think another thing is that this is a form of giving yourself permission, as you said, and taking it seriously, because I think some people are afraid to take it seriously. Like people will laugh at me if I say, people laugh at me if I say I'm spending an hour a week writing poems. And it's like, who cares? Like, give yourself permission to write poems for an hour a week. Like, the world is burning down. Like, go write some poetry. I think it's awesome to have creativity in your life. And putting it in your calendar makes you take it as seriously as a doctor's appointment, and taking your child to an after-school activity, meeting your grandfather at the nursing home every Monday for lunch. Like, your writing should be a part of that, a part of your life. Because if you don't make time for it, no one's going to make time for it for you.
I talk to people who I'm like, do you schedule the gym? Or do you feel pressure to schedule to go to the gym on the same day all the time? Why don't you do the same for your like creative self too? Why don't you do the same for your emotional self?
Mm-hmm. Right.
I like the writing cubby idea. Do you have a writing cubby? A place that you go to write?
I am very privileged because I now have my own home office.
Ooh.
And it was so cute. Speaking of my boyfriend, he bought this house a couple of years ago, and I asked him what was the best part about we moved from Brooklyn, so now it feels like a mansion. It's not a mansion, but compared to Brooklyn, it feels like a mansion. And I was like, what's your favorite part about the new house? And he was like, that I gave you your own office.
That's
so
sweet.
I have my art behind me. I have my books. So I have my own special space at home, but I also live walking distance to a Panera. So that is my other special place. I love me some Panera.
I love that. For me, so I'm in my office right now, my writing space. It's like a corner of our garage turned studio. And we painted it. That helped make it feel less like a garage, just like having the walls painted a different color. But I actually can't write in here. this feels, because I'm a creative entrepreneur, because so much of my work is coaching and teaching online courses and doing things like this, when I sit here, it's hard for me to turn off my business brain. And so this is actually like, even though we made it for me to write, I can't write here. So sometimes you create this special place and it ends up being something else. So I write on the dining room table, much to my family's chagrin, because I live with my sister and 2 kids, and the girls really dislike having to watch for my computer while they're eating and spilling their drinks. I write on the back patio and I write at coffee shops. And I am very privileged that I can work from anywhere. So I tend to write in Mexico. I live 20 minutes from the border. So I like to go hop across the border and go write in Mexico and literally leave the country to write. Feels really amazing to me.
Wait, you go to a coffee shop in Mexico?
Sometimes I go to a coffee shop in Mexico. I have Sentry so I can cross the border easily. And sometimes I go and stay a couple days with a place down there that I love and a friend down there that I love. And then sometimes I just got back from 6 weeks in Mexico City, and I just stayed with a lady who's a writer. And I, as somebody mentioned in the chat, I'm going to teach a conference in Mexico in San Miguel de Allende in February, and I'll stay extra days and just write. So I'm very lucky that I can just like hop to Mexico. It's literally like a 20-minute drive away from my house. But what I bring that up is because the minute I cross the border, I feel permission, I feel muses, I feel all the stuff, and there's nothing that's changed. When I go to a coffee shop, it feels like my creative juices are flowing, and I go to a coffee shop and it just changes everything. So it doesn't have to be like, you don't have to create a whole home office, because you could create a whole home office and then never write from it. I have never written any of my books, any of my like writing for me in my home office. I've never been able to, and I've tried to make it and all the stuff, and I usually just end up on the sofa or on the backyard. So it's not about
you made me realize I'm telling a lie, Lauren, which is that
are you lying?
I actually write in the morning. I write my novel. I move my laptop down to the dining room table because I can look out the window. And then in the afternoon, I do my email, my business stuff, or my freelancing or whatever from my office. So you're right. I do have a separate place where I write my novel. I very rarely write my novel in here.
Yeah. And that's one of the biggest suggestions I give to people who want to have a writing career. I'm like, your writing is probably not where you're going to make your money. So have the place where you're like doing the work part, which is answering the emails and doing the pitches. My dog's going crazy because the evil mailman's here. I don't know if you guys can hear him, but forgive me. I'm being protected from the evil mailman. But having kind of 2 separate places, having where you do like the business part and having just something comfortable that you can slide into. Think of it like, where would you go to read a book? That's where you want to go to write a book. Do you agree? Does that feel resonant for you?
Yeah, because like the thing is, I have skylights up here in my office, but I don't have a window I can look out of. And there's just something about, I have to be able to look out a window. Like for some people, it's like the noise of a coffee shop. I can write in a coffee shop, but like, being home alone and being able to look out a window is my ideal situation.
That feels really decadent. Home alone, nobody else around, and you got a window to look out. Like that's all I need. I'm right there with you.
Yeah, and I would also add to what you said is that I don't think people need to go away to write, but it's such a luxury if you can. And I took, for my own birthday, I gave myself the present of going away for a few days to work on my novel. And it's not, I did get a lot of writing done, but not that much more than usual. But what I realized is that I had all this time alone to just let my mind wander, because I wasn't going like, oh, the dishes, oh, the laundry, like, oh, I need to get the mail. So it gave me more space just to be alone in my own head. Because I think the other thing is that we measure writing in different ways. We measure writing, how many hours did I do? How many or what is it called? You have
how many hourglasses?
Hourglass, thank you. How many hourglasses did I do? How many words did I write today? Am I doing NaNoWriMo? Am I trying to get blah, blah, blah? But writing can also be just the time when you're going out for a walk, or you're driving in the car to go to the dry cleaner, and you're like, oh my God, like that character is so-and-so's brother, and I didn't know it until now. Like that's part of the writing life, is you have to have this uninterrupted kind of just space where you're cooking. It also happens to me when I'm cooking, when I'm chopping vegetables, where I'm not writing, but that's when the ideas come.
That reminds me, I once read that Steven Spielberg said all his best ideas happen when he's driving his car. So he had to like get away to take notes while he was driving his car without crashing his car in LA traffic. And I was like, that's true. Like my greatest ideas happen when I'm out on a walk. My greatest ideas happen when I'm going through a bookstore. My greatest ideas happen when I'm taking a shower. Like it's never when I'm sitting down. I feel like when I sit down to write, that's when I'm implementing the ideas that I've taken notes on in my phone. Like I have a phone app that's probably 20 pages long with notes for ideas for each book that I have.
That's totally true.
Yeah, so I'm with you on that. A lot of times the writing part is just like implementing what you came up with during these creative dates.
Yeah, and I wonder if this is connected to what we were talking about earlier about writer's block. If you never have time to just like daydream or wander, you may not have enough ideas to put into place when you're sitting down. So if you're stuck and nothing's coming when you're sitting down on your special writing date, go for a walk. Like that's when you can get up and move, because I also find like if I'm stuck, even if it's as simple as like I'm stuck, I get up to go put the laundry from the washer to the dryer, and that's when I figure out what I was stuck on.
I love that. So we talked about, okay, getting your butt in the chair, how to do that. What do you do when you do it? I am a big fan of reward systems. I didn't have a reward system for myself. I was like, well, the finished writing product should be enough reward, which is great. Like 20 years from now when the book's finally published kind of thing. But like, what about now? And then I got a dog and I got into the psychology of like, if you want a dog to do something, you always reward them and give them attention when they do it right, and you never reward them or give them attention, and that includes like talking to them when they do it wrong. So all of the attention is this reward system. So I started thinking, I was like, how can I stop rewarding myself for procrastinating and start rewarding myself for getting the work done? So I implemented some reward systems. But I'd be interested, do you do reward systems? Do you reward yourself?
Yes, I do. I have a calendar that I mark an X on the days that I write. So that helps me. And this comes from this Jerry Seinfeld anecdote where he said like he would mark on a calendar an X for every day that he wrote jokes. Because that's the only way to get better as a comic is to like write more jokes and like have more bad jokes that flop, right? In order to write more good jokes. So keeping up that streak system helps me. And then sometimes earlier this summer, I had to write this. I got an assignment and I had 7 days to write this like very reported piece. And I wouldn't really consider myself a journalist. It was like a crash course in journalism. And I was getting up at 5 a.m. because I know my brain is better in the morning. So I would get up at 5 a.m. And so I came up with this reward system where I would post something to Instagram or Twitter, and then I would turn my phone on airplane mode. So I wasn't allowed to see all the likes or the comments or the responses until I, did 2 hours or called that source or got that done. So I use social media as my own sneaky reward system because it feels, it's a dopamine hit. Like it feels good to get those little hearts. You got 14 hearts on that photo or whatever. That feels good. So I would kind of delay it by having it available to myself later after I completed whatever it was I had to do.
I love that. We were talking earlier about putting your phone on airplane mode and turning off the Wi-Fi, but I also wanted to mention I use Freedom app, and you can schedule when it will turn. It can either turn all websites, all the internet off, or it can turn off just social media or certain websites. So you can also schedule. So I have it so it doesn't let me go onto social media after 10 a.m., before 10 a.m. So I can only go on social media. I've done it till like 2 p.m. I have to wait till then. And then it will do that for me. So I love that idea, but I turn on the airplane mode and plug the thing back in and do the thing. Like I find myself doing it. So Freedom does it for me. And you have to like shut down everything, restart your computer, restart your computer for it to go. So you can like, if you need the internet, you can do it. But once it's in a session, it's hard to like, it takes more effort than it's worth to get you back on the internet. And so there's a link in your worksheet down here in the at happywriterdays.com that has a link to that as well. So Freedom app is a really great thing for me if you're someone like me who needs all the people keeping you from doing the internet, or you'll never do what you got to do.
Yeah. I think like I'm not like I need freedom, and I'm not like yet ready to admit that I need freedom. But I need it. I probably need it. But the other thing that I read recently that was really interesting to me is the idea of, are you motivated by process or are you motivated by outcomes? If you're motivated by process, your reward might be like, I'm going to write, 2 weeks in a row, and then I'm going to buy a brand new notebook from my favorite stationery store so that I can continue writing in. If you're motivated by outcome, which is what I am, Scheduling a time to meet with my writing group and finishing a chapter so that I can give it to them, like having some kind of deadline or having a deadline to send it to my agent. That's what really motivates me, because it makes me feel like the book is real. You could design, if you're artsy, you could design a book cover for what you're working on so that you have that stuck on your bulletin board to remind you of the final outcome. So I think that's an interesting question to ask yourself. Are you motivated by process or by outcome?
I love that. Sometimes I go back and forth. So sometimes it's one or the other. Like, there is nothing that makes me want to journal more than getting a brand new pen or a brand new notebook. But when it's a longer, like, book type thing, I definitely need other rewards. So sometimes I go to the bookstore and I look at the genre that it's in, and I look at where my name would be in that genre. Yes, and that is like, more than anything else, for me at least, that gets my ass back home and writing. Looking at that gap where my name should be, where my book should be in a bookstore or the library, really gets my juices going. Like, okay, I'm gonna write right now.
Yeah.
So any last minute, we are above time. All these workshops have gone longer than the half an hour they expected because we have such wonderful, wonderful people. But any last minute comments or things that we had a couple of questions, but we answered them throughout the time. I brought up the questions, and shout out to the couple people who are coming to my San Miguel de Allende workshop. I'm excited about that. Thanks for coming to this workshop beforehand and seeing my face before we get to meet in person.
Yeah. If anyone has any final questions, feel free to put them in that chat box.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I would just say, schedule your writing time the way you would schedule anything else. Think about that word audacity, or think about a word that means something to you that's inspiring, that if you look at your laptop and you see that word, you'll be like, this is why I'm writing this project. And then reward yourself.
I love that. I also have writer's block is just fear. What are you afraid of? Is a Post-it that I have on my computer when I'm working.
Yeah. Oh, and I wanted to read this one other quote that I love. This is the Italian novelist Elena Ferrante, and she says, "Writing requires maximum ambition, maximum audacity, and programmatic disobedience."
I love that.
So that really fires me up as someone who likes to rebel and be disobedient.
That's fabulous. Okay, we have somebody who has a question. And while they're writing the question, how can people keep in touch with you if they want? Like, what's the best way to stay in touch with you?
My website is leighstein.com, and my name is spelled Leighstein. And I'm on Twitter a lot, more than I should be. My handle is Rhymes with B, and I'm also on Instagram, and my handle is Leigh Stein. And I have a cat who was born without a tail, so that's content you can look forward to on my Instagram.
I love that. So she
does not yet have her own Instagram account.
Not yet, but it's working. Working on it. Well, when it does, your cat and my dog can be friends on Instagram then.
Totally.
So we have a question from Sir Girl. If family disruption is a problem, can you suggest ideas to treat your writing seriously, that your writing is valid? I take care of a sick parent, so I can't always disappear for hours at a time. Unfortunately, I wait very late at night or early in the morning to write, but by then I can't think clearest after work, after tending to her. An analogy: to convince a skeptical relative that medication is valid for mental illness, I compare it to insulin for diabetes. I think that's a great analogy that I see that used a lot, the mental illness to insulin, like you would treat it. But I also think that that's a great analogy because if you have diabetes, you also want to treat your lifestyle and what your mental health is and what you're eating and what you're doing. So you wouldn't want to just take insulin. You'd want to understand what you're going through. And so I personally have, I have borderline personality disorder. I have had suicidal ideations in the past. I've really struggled with depression in the past. And the number one thing that's helped me is to write and is to follow what I'm doing. And so I had to be really adamant with everybody in my life. And it's been really hard, and it's taken years, and they're just starting to understand. My parents are just starting to understand this writing thing is actually really important to me, not just professionally, but it is the number one way that I stay sane myself. And so I would suggest really getting clear on why you write for you and why you write for others and what writing does for you. So for me, everybody knows that if I don't write, I go insane. Like my brain starts to do things because everything that I'm not getting out is just sitting in there fermenting. And then I like to think I was one of my brother's caretakers when he was really, really sick. And it was hard. I didn't write very much, but I didn't get that. Like there was no hour period where there wasn't something that I had to help him with. And so I feel you on that. And what I did is there are lots of notes in my phone and I would just jot down stuff. So if you can't find the time throughout the day, a thought that comes up or a process. And then I had to try once a week to get just an hour of alone time. So what I would do is I would ask people not to wake me up on Sunday morning, that I would probably be awake, but I just stay in my bed for a little bit longer on Sunday mornings. And I just grab a little notebook that I kept by my bed and I would just write in it. And, yeah, I mean, I completely feel you on helping with a sick family member. That can be so hard, and finding time, I remember on my 29th birthday, I was so upset because it was my birthday and I didn't get to celebrate it because my sister had a brand new baby that had almost died at birth and my brother had cancer. And my dad told me when he saw that I was upset, he was like, well, Lauren, you don't have kids, you don't have cancer, your needs just don't matter right now. And fighting that is so hard. And so I feel you. When you're not the one that's sick, it can often feel like your needs don't matter. But you can't help them if you aren't helping yourself. It's so cliche, but the whole put your face mask on first.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you, and finding time to write, you are probably, let's be real, you're probably not going to be able to have the hour a day to write. You're probably going to be too exhausted at the end of the day. But if you can just keep a notebook and write down, like write for 5 minutes or write down 5 sentences. Or honestly, after my brother died, my notebook was like FUUUUUCCK. That was a journal entry. Just like, fuck, what's happening? And sometimes I could write one word. And I give you permission to write just one word and to feel like that's enough. And to take 1 extra minute in your bed in the morning or at night to just jot down your feelings and see where that goes.
Yeah.
Any suggestions, Leigh?
Yeah. I mean, what you said, I think it's a really difficult situation. And I think like life comes in waves. It's not always going to be this way. So that's another thing to remember. But one other suggestion I would have is what you said, Lauren, about how you asked not to be woken up on Sunday mornings. That was a way for you to set this tiny boundary around your own space. And I know it's hard in family systems and each family is different. I mean, saying no and setting boundaries is like the lesson I have to learn for my entire life. But if there's small ways that you can say, you know, Sunday morning is mine, or every Monday I'm going to the coffee shop, that's my time. And claim these small things, your family will adjust. They might be mad at first, but I think people adjust to what we put out there. And if what we put out there, and this is, I'm speaking from my personal experience, if what we put out there is, I love taking care of people, I'll do anything, I don't need to take care of myself, I just want to give, people will respond to that. They'll be like, okay, great, because I'd like this, and I'd like this, and could you also do this, and could you also do this? But if you start setting up these little tiny boundaries and saying no in small ways, you can build a barrier for yourself that's going to help you be able to stay sane and keep writing in the midst of this chaos.
And you know what my actual setting boundaries did? My sister and I didn't always get along, but now we live together. And my setting boundaries and saying, actually, my like writing really matters and it keeps me sane and I need to do it, or you all are going to also face the consequences because they all saw how crazy I got when I wasn't writing. Now my sister, she makes time for yoga or she makes time for her art. She's an artist. And so by giving yourself permission, you can help give other people permission too. I know that that's really hard in the moment. And I understand what it's like my family were not understanding that I didn't want to give everything of myself to helping take care of my brother. But you know, my brother was also sitting there being like, Lauren, I don't care, go write. Like, please just like give me an hour break. You're all hovering. So sometimes I tried to give him a lot and what he really needed was for me to take that hour and go write. And so it's every situation is so different and so hard, but I hope some of the ideas that we came up with here can help spark an idea for you. And thank you so much for sharing that. That's a really rough situation. And I think that sometimes when we talk about like, yeah, write an hour a day, go over a week, we forget, and even myself who's been through being the caretaker, we forget how much life's obligations can get in the way, which is why I say don't start with trying to do an hour a day. Start with trying to do an hour a week. Start with trying to do 10 minutes a week. Like whatever you can carve out for yourself is really important.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Cosign. Yeah, I was so burnt out earlier this year, and I had to resign from my conference. And I thought the day that I resigned, I would start writing my next novel. And I took a nap for 2 months. I was literally like asleep. Like I hardly worked at all. I took naps almost every day because I had to rest before I could write again. So I think asking yourself, what does my work need, is a good question, but you also need to ask yourself, what do I need?
Yeah. And I do have to say, I didn't follow a lot of my overall goals when my brother was sick, and that was okay then.
Right.
Because I spent this time with my brother.
Right.
And I needed to spend time with my brother because the biggest regret I would have had after he died is having not. So sometimes you do, sometimes you're giving it up for something else. Like, so being conscious, but it was a conscious choice, and that recognition and that decision and that awareness and that, there's a word I'm thinking of it that starts with an M, and I can't really, anyways, the being aware of it.
It's a trade-off, right? Like you decided, I may not, finish this book or whatever you're working on, but I'm gaining this time with my brother.
Mm-hmm. And I feel the same way. I mean, that's a big, it's easy to say I'm going to make time for my brother when he's dying of cancer. But like, I think I live with my nieces now. And while I never wanted kids, I do recognize that it's important for me to take time out of my day when they get home. They get home like right smack in the middle of my workday to say hi to them and see how their day went. Yeah. So I like the Shonda Rhimes talks about, like, when her kids ask her if she will play with them, she says yes now, because she won't regret when she gets older having played with her kids more. Right. Work will always be there, and you'll always have something you want to write. So letting yourself also have permission to not write as well. Mindfulness. Thank you. Mindfulness. I was like, what is that? It's such an obvious one. Thank you. Mindfulness. And thank you in the chat for telling me what that word was. So if there are any other questions, you can ask them in the chat. If not, so if people wanted to work with you, Leigh, what do you do? How do you work with people if they want to delve deeper with you?
So I am a writing coach, and the way that works is I talk to my clients once a week by phone or by video chat, and usually they have a very specific goal, something they want to finish, and for some reason they've been putting that off, and so I help them stay accountable to their own goals, and I also help talk them through these issues that we've talked about today: imposter syndrome, feeling like a fraud, procrastination, avoiding writing the scene that they know that they have to write. And then I also teach, I have a memoir workshop that'll be at the 92nd Street Y in Manhattan in spring. And I also do manuscript critique. So if you've written a book or most of a book and you'd like me to look at it, I have written a book of poems, a novel, and a memoir. So I have experience in multiple genres, and I can give you big picture comments and also little picture, micro comments, and all that's on my website, leighstein.com.
And if we want to read your work, where's a good?
Oh yes, if you'd like to read my work, my newest book is called Land of Enchantment. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, at your indie bookstore. It's about an abusive relationship I was in my early 20s, and my ex died in a motorcycle accident just a few weeks after I had thought I was finally done with him. So that caused a lot of complicated emotions. And then I also have a novel called The Fallback Plan, which is about a young woman that has to move back in with her parents after college, and a book of poetry called Dispatch from the Future.
I like it.
Thanks, Lauren.
If you want to get a hold of me, I'm at laurenmariefleming.com. I have blog posts. I have lots of online courses, including some free courses. And I also do coaching as well, I tend to offer the left brain solutions for right brain people. So I'm really good at digging in for the logistics. So if you're looking for some logistical help, if you're just like, literally, how do I make time? I'm here for you. And we also have information for you in the worksheet. So remember to download that at happywriterdays.com, or if you're watching this live, right below this video. And also I have a free course called Finding Your Right Space. So if you're looking to figure out how do you make space in your life for writing, you can check out my free course, and the link to that is in the worksheet.
And we both have newsletters.
And we both have newsletters, which is a great way. I love Leigh's newsletter. I read it every week. I love it. So it's a great way to keep in touch.
Yeah.
I am actually going off social media for all of 2018. So I went off for half of 2017 and it wasn't enough. So I'm just going off for a while. So social media is not the best, Audacity, right? Not the place, but I wanted to send you letters. So my newsletter is the best way to keep in touch. Also, this is, again, part of the Happy Writer Days series. So you can enter to win over $2,000 in coaching and courses from both of us and our other experts. And you can enter that by December 10th at happywriterdays.com. And if you happen to see this after December 10th, that site will have great resources and links to all of the information, including these workshops, but also free resources from all of our experts. Thank you again, Leigh, for coming. Thank you. We had quite a lot of viewers on this one and great chat. So this was great. Thank you all
had a lot to say.
for joining. And we will see you all at happywriterdays.com.
Yes.
Bye, everybody. Bye.